And for our final panel of the GreenGov 2015 day here at GW, would you please welcome our energy experts. First, DOE's Deputy Assistant Secretary for Energy, Kathleen Hogan. The EPA's Energy Star National Manager, Katy Hatcher. Schneider Electric's Director of Federal Energy and Sustainability Services, Jeff Sherman. State Department's Senior Advisor for Energy, Environment, and Sustainability, Landon van Dyke. And to moderate, from GW's Department of Engineering Management and Systems Engineering, Assistant Professor Shittu.
Thank you very much. Welcome to this last panel for the day. And I promise it's going to be an exciting one, and one that will try to match the previous panels in terms of the level of information we are going to gather from this. Let me get right straight into the panel discussion. And I'll start with you, Kathleen. 40 years ago, the US consumed 1.6 quadrillion British thermal units of energy. That amount has dropped by 40% as of 2013. So the question I have for you is, what components, strategies, technologies that you have in place with respect to the Federal Energy Management Program have you used with agencies to accomplish some of these goals? And how can these goals be sustained given the new level of achievements that we're looking at?
Great questions, and you're right to point out the amazing progress, really, that the federal government has made in reducing its energy use, improving its energy intensity across its buildings and facilities, and of course, you get an amazing number of greenhouse gas emissions with that. When people do look at the federal footprint, it is, it's sort of 50-50. Energy use between buildings, facilities, as well as then transportation or mobile vehicle energy use. And I think what we see today is tremendous progress on the building side, and in part because of the frameworks that have been put in place either through Congress or executive orders, and sometimes there's a little bit of a back and forth between those things. Congress acts first, or the President's office through executive orders can act first. So as many people know, we've been under a pretty aggressive goal structure for our buildings of getting to 30% savings through 2015. We're not quite at that, but and that was relative to 2003. We're sort of at around 20% savings, but if you back up even just a little bit more, what you see over that 40-year period that you mentioned is a 40% improvement in the energy intensity of buildings in the federal sector. So it really is quite impressive. But you were sort of asking sort of not so much at the top level results, but how did we really get there? And I do think so much of it comes from availing ourselves of the technologies that are already there in the marketplace today. It's that sort of that goal structure, putting that in place, and then improved measurement. I mean, it's like everybody knows you can't manage what you don't measure. So let's measure, let's make improvements. Clearly there's opportunities around lighting and heating and cooling and some, sort of those things. And then we have to figure out as we at the DOE help all the agencies through our Federal Energy Management Program, what are really the best ways we can do our job to help? And so much of it is more around project facilitation, project identification, project facilitation, training the workforce that they can make, identify those good projects for themselves, and that type of thing. And I think we sit here being very excited about the new goals that the White House has put in place as of March to continue that great progress we've been making in buildings at about 2.5% a year. And that is both energy efficiency and renewable energy. The way it's structured for the federal government is we can get credit for on-site renewables as well. And of course, that will make a big contribution to the new greenhouse gas goal of reducing by 40% by 2025. So again, and we do see this as an aggressive but doable goal that we'll be looking to help the agencies achieve through the sort of the next generation of technology opportunities. And we're looking at things like wireless sensors, wireless lighting opportunities, high performance heating and cooling technologies, and then looking at sort of some more whole building approaches in those types of buildings that are prevalent in the federal sector, but you also see more broadly across the country, things like data centers. We have a new data center challenge that's a public-private partnership. We're looking at other opportunities to do that. And we are also looking to do sort of a set of technology challenges where we hope to bring together sort of the best of what's going on in the federal government, but also with the private sector, because we see a great opportunity for synergies beyond what the federal government is sort of doing by itself.
Excellent. I'm going to build on what you just said in terms of measurement, because how do we value and quantify what we haven't measured? So I'm going to flip over to you, Katy, and I'll speak specifically about a content of the executive order. Section 3A, subsection 1, subsection C of the executive order 13693 states that, and I quote, monthly performance data needs to be entered into EPA's Energy Star Portfolio Manager for covered buildings. What is EPA's Energy Star Portfolio Manager, and how can this help agencies?
Well, I think that's a great question. So what is Energy Star's Portfolio Manager? Essentially, it's a tool that's free to be used by any organization, including federal agencies, to measure and track energy consumption as well as energy cost, water consumption and cost, and a host of sustainable practice measures. And that's encompassed in our guiding principles checklist. And over the years, the tool's use has grown substantially. There's more than 400,000 buildings in the tool, and thousands of organizations are using it to benchmark their energy and water performance, to the point where we now have about 40% of the commercial market in the tool. Some market segments like K through 12 schools were a little over 50% of the market. And so why did this become a requirement in the executive order? I think in part because it's become an industry standard that's out there to be used. And building on what Kathleen said, that measurement is incredibly important, and you can't manage what you don't measure. So EPA created this tool years ago to take the data that agencies have of utility bills and other organizations, of course, as well, and turn that data into information that's usable for making decisions. And one thing that was necessary in the market, we felt, was the creation of the Energy Star score, which allowed a point of comparison of one building to other buildings like it across the country, one office building to other office buildings across the country. And through the development of the Energy Star score for many commercial market space types, we can certify those space types as Energy Star. So there's now about 25,000 commercial buildings out there that are certified as Energy Star. And so in addition to being a tool that can be used to measure and track energy consumption and many other things, as well as calculating greenhouse gas emissions, it's used as a pathway for recognition to demonstrate the results of buildings.
Excellent. So I'll kind of jump over to you, Landon. I understand that the State Department is actually deploying many smart meters, which follows on measurement, so that we can quantify our consumption and hopefully know where to make savings. In what ways or way is the State Department actually harnessing the benefit of smart meters vis-a-vis the sort of program that Katy just talked about with respect to the program manager that you have there?
Excellent question. So on our domestic buildings, we have obviously adhered to the 2005 mandate to have smart meters or advanced meters deployed on our facilities. And what we've done is basically taken all that information back and are having engineers look at the pattern that our buildings are producing on a daily basis. And from that, we're able to identify areas where we can save right off the bat. We're noticing equipment's turning on all at the same time, right as we're going into the peak hours of the day. And so we're able to learn that we need to stagger our equipment as it's turning itself on so that our demand load isn't exceeding a certain level. We also are identifying when equipment is turning on and off for no reason. We're actually seeing certain peaks throughout the day, and where, for one building in particular, we noticed it had several peaks, and we were wondering what was going on, and we found out it was an $8 thermometer on the roof, which was telling the HVAC system to use indoor air or outdoor air, was broken. And so with that one piece alone, the $8 thermometer, we saved about $50,000, or we avoided about $50,000 in monthly costs just from that one piece. So to be able to identify how a building is operating throughout the day and be able to know when we can shift equipment or appliances to turn on at a different part of the day when energy is either less expensive or it's more taxing on the grid, it helps us, and it helps us help the community as well. And additionally, we're looking at weekend use. So again, many of our facility managers might not always be observing what's going on in our buildings on the weekends. So when we look at the patterns, we like to see about 50% of the base load should be that of on the weekends versus during the weekdays. What we're finding in some of our buildings, we were at 80% or higher, and we were able to identify what equipment could be shut down for the weekend ahead of time. So great ways for us to save energy just by looking at the actual data.
Interesting. My next question, which again builds on that, to you, Jeff, is in a related project that we executed a couple of months ago with the Environmental and Energy Management Institute here at the George Washington University. We were approached by PEPCO to kind of develop this consumer education initiative in order to have a platform by which energy consumers will actually know when they consume the most energy, and maybe they can begin to do some demand response strategies. PEPCO, not a government agency, neither is Schneider. So my question to you is, how do you see non-government players, non-government agencies like Schneider, how do you see them coming into this discussion and moving the needle forward?
Great question. First, on behalf of all the private sector folks, thank you for including us in GreenGov Symposium today. Thank you to Kate Brandt, the CEQ. I think it's fair to say that we share your passion for sustainability, but I think it's also fair to say that the aggressive objectives in this new executive order will require collaboration with the private sector. So I think it's wise for us to continue to build forums like this where we can collaborate and share ideas. So thank you on behalf of all of us in the private sector. We appreciate that. So to your question, I think the private sector, you're working in a budget-constrained environment, right? Definitely have a challenge of restricted access to capital, appropriated funds. You're fighting for dollars to do energy efficiency initiatives. So from the private sector standpoint, I think we can do a few things. First is we can provide access to subject matter expertise. My job is basically to hire very smart people and make sure they're pointed in the right direction, right? That's my job. And make sure they have the tools to do their jobs well. The second thing is we can provide you access to capital. We've heard multiple times today about energy savings performance contracts, utility energy service contracts, and fundamentally those tools allow government agencies to contract with an energy services company, and we will work together to identify energy conservation measures. We will guarantee energy savings over a period of years, so that the federal agency can use those dollars to fund needed facility improvements today. So that access to capital is something that I think the private sector can provide. And the third thing, to your point with the PEPCO question, The previous executive order required a lot of mandates around advanced metering and data collection. And what I hear a lot from our clients is, I have all this data, now what? Now what? How do I turn this data into actionable information? And I think the private sector has the software and the subject matter expertise to simplify all of the big data that we have now available to us to start making intelligent decisions about how we run our buildings.
Very good. So I'll go back to you, Kathleen. In terms of executing some of these strategies, not even just executing them, but also evaluating some of the agencies performance-wise, can you say something briefly about this concept of performance contracting, and how do you actually use that in apportioning, the carrot and the stick, as the case may be, if that's part of what that entails?
Yeah, so you've certainly heard a lot about performance contracting today, but I don't know if you've heard the statistics that probably about half of the annual investment in sort of federal improvement, energy efficiency, renewable energy projects really does come through the performance contracting mechanism. And that's sort of what we've been doing the last set of years. I think there's a question as to what that balance will look like going forward as you continue to have pressure on federal budgets in particular. And I think what we're working to do in the Federal Energy Management Program at DOE is to be able to work with the agencies so that they can avail themselves of performance contracting, this mechanism, as much as possible. So it's the Federal Energy Management Program that has put out a new, very large contract competition to select sort of the next round of performance contractors that can most easily come to work across the civilian agencies that will complement what has been done by the Army Corps of Engineers. And certainly one of the things we're striving to do is make all of this be as streamlined and as standardized as possible so that people that do it once will know how to do it again. And I guess some of the other things that we see across the federal agencies, people change. So you get somebody who's done one. These are complex undertakings. So we see an ongoing need for training of the federal people that are in charge of doing these contracts. We also see that they're complex enough that having a federal procurement specialist that they can work with throughout the many stages of these performance contracts is very helpful, and that's something that the Federal Energy Management Program provides to interested agencies. And then we're doing a number of other things to really sort of help standardize and streamline performance contracting, not just to ease the process of enhancing its use for the federal government, but really more broadly across our country. We're working with states and local governments too to make sure that these streamlined methods, standardized templates can work as well for universities, states and local government school districts as they do for the federal government. Because the more we do this in a similar standardized way, again, we're going to increase its uptake. And certainly there's great opportunity in the federal space, but there's people talk about a $70 billion opportunity more broadly in the institutional marketplace across our country. So this is just a great mechanism to really figure out how to avail ourselves of, and certainly we want the federal government to be in a leadership role in helping modeling and helping improve all of this.
Thank you very much. So Katy, while they have this broad sort of scheme, performance contracting, I understand that your portfolio manager actually helps track energy savings, efficiency gains. And I understand that for people to actually take advantage, or for agencies to take advantage of what the program manager does, there has to be a sort of a duplex mechanism where you perform well, you actually get whoever's performed well informed of their performance. How does this portfolio manager, how does it ensure that the people that are actually saving are sort of encouraged to even save more. This question came from the discussion I had over lunch with some participants here from NARA. And there was this gentleman who said, well, when you guys save, where does the saving go to? Do you earn more salaries? I mean, do you get more exotic facilities? So how does the portfolio manager, carry or ensure that there's this back and forth where you improve, you actually encourage to improve more,
Well, through advocating through the tool, continuous energy management, essentially what it's doing is creating a feedback loop so you can see what your energy consumption is now, and year after year you can set a baseline, you can see your reduction over the baseline. It's not actually just focusing on pre and post project. It's really continually managing the energy consumption at the whole building level with all the fuels that's used by the facility, and putting that into a metric such as weather normalized energy use intensity, so that's energy use per square foot. And there's a host of other metrics in the tool that facilitate good energy management. And so it's really seeing that reduction over a baseline that you set within the tool that can help provide that feedback loop. And we also have recognition opportunities. We run an annual national building competition called the Battle of the Buildings, where teams and individual buildings are competing to reduce energy consumption by at least 20%. And we have thousands of buildings that compete every year. We've been doing this for years, and I'm glad to say that this next round of the competition, the General Services Administration has entered approximately 600 buildings, and those will be structured into many teams, and they'll be competing against each other as well as all the other teams. And the savings that we see many achieve the 20% reduction, and as well as teams in top categories that achieve even more. And we also see organization-wide savings that we've recognized in the past. Over the years, through the Energy Star program, we've recognized hundreds of school districts for reducing by 10% or more across their whole portfolio of schools. Some have even achieved 30%, and a few have even achieved well more than that. So the amount you can save really depends on how energy efficient you are in the first place. And what we're encouraging organizations to do is use energy when and where you need it, and not when you don't. And so it's in addition to retrofitting things as needed, it's about managing the energy consumption on a daily basis to then see that those energy bills are being reduced, and that you're redirecting what you would pay to the utility back into the facilities or back into the organization. So it could either go back into the facilities for more improvements or to pay a debt service, or if you're cash flow positive now, it could go for school districts per se to teacher salaries. So fewer teachers need to be let go because they reduced operating costs and have more for salaries.
Before I let go of you on that question, in a research project, I'm an academic, so we're always doing research and digging holes and looking for answers. In a research problem I am actually working on with a colleague of mine in another institution, we started asking the question, given government support for renewable technologies over the years, we still have about less than 3–4% coming from wind and solar combined in our total energy mix. And we said, why is that? So we started digging, and we used renewable portfolio standards as a yardstick to actually evaluate the effectiveness of policies across states. And we found, surprisingly, that even in states without the RPS policies, they are actually doing renewable energy. And then we started asking, further that why is that? In the absence of policy, firms are still doing renewable. And then we figured out that, it is about competition. In other words, I see my neighbor is doing renewable. If I don't want to be left behind, I better do renewable as well. Which takes me to the follow-on question I want to ask. In this portfolio manager, are there pieces of information that the users get to see in terms of, well, what's the national average, for example? What's the time of use that is peak nationally? And does the diversity or the differences in the rates that people pay for energy bills, does it factor into the averages that you use in evaluating the performance of the players in this portfolio?
Our specialty is taking a look at annualized energy consumption that's come in from monthly build data where applicable that's then weather normalized. And so we're actually not looking at interval data and looking at peak information. We're simply trying to move the market from potentially not managing their energy consumption in buildings on a whole building basis to combining all that data, their electricity use with their gas use and other consumption, and looking at it all together. Once you've done that, I think it's wonderful to then move to the next step and obtain interval data to then do more analytical, deeper analytical look into where the energy inefficiencies might be within the building.
So Jeff, I know members of the audience are really keen to hear specific success stories of or maybe case studies that you can present on how this partnership with agencies or even maybe other private firms, how such partnerships or collaborations have been successful. What were the main stumbling blocks you came across, the challenges that you see right now as we try to even make this government-private sector collaboration stronger?
Yeah, good question. First, let me tell a quick success story, and then I'll get to some challenges. So we have recently completed a project working with our friends at the GSA. It was part of their Deep Energy Retrofit Challenge. They assigned us the difficult task of working in the Virgin Islands. I know, it was a tough task, but not hard to find people to mobilize for that time. But the energy rates are very high on the islands. So we worked with the GSA. We identified energy conservation measures at this facility, and we reduced their energy footprint by half. And then thankfully, we also had access to a field adjacent to the facility. And we were able to install a solar array that completely funded the remaining energy requirements for their facility. So it's the first federal ESPC project to achieve net zero energy status, and it's thanks to the leadership and vision of the GSA and the Deep Energy Retrofit Challenge. So that's not to say that the challenge wasn't without its challenges. So we have a practice of doing lessons learned and exercises after each one with the agency. The GSA had their share out last week, and multiple folks were there for that. One of our challenges is having a common place for data. Where are we, now that we're having these projects, we're getting lessons learned, where can we as a community house all of this information so that we can share lessons learned, right? A smart man learns from his mistakes, a wise man from the mistakes of others, right? So let's learn from the mistakes of others so that we can get more efficient in these projects. And as we look to establish best practices, I think a key part of that is capturing those lessons learned from projects. So that in island environments especially, it can be proving a challenge. So we'd love to be part of databasing this work so that we can all have access to that information.
So, talking about the success story and the challenges they have, Landon, the State Department, one of the biggest departments you have in the U.S., given its international presence in almost every country with, established democracy, it's easy to implement some of those strategies here at home, but then when you go abroad, you are faced with, challenges that can at times be overwhelming. How do you, how does the State Department sort of face those challenges abroad? Because, and this question is coming from yesterday, actually. I was at the State Department to give a lecture to about 22 international visitors from abroad, from all over the world. And one thing that came out of that, it's a discussion on climate change and the recent IPCC report, which I participated in writing. And one thing that came out of that was, the U.S. claims, the U.S. does a lot, but globally, people outside don't see it. Now, in terms of the presence that the U.S. has got in almost every country with sane democracy, how are those challenges in those foreign environments, in implementing some of this? How do you overcome that, given that we can do all we want in energy savings, carbon dioxide emissions reduction at home? Climate change problem is a global one and requires concerted effort across the world. So how are those challenges being optimized?
Wow, great question. I would say that we look at all those challenges as an opportunity. That's first. The State Department, one of our huge objectives or primary objectives is obviously to share the American experience abroad. So obviously we're going to be tapping into our private sector partners. We're going to be tapping into other agencies, the public sector as well, and take any success that we can have here in the U.S. and try to apply it. And it's not going to always work. And we've tried to apply several things that we would think would work here, but just for some reason don't work abroad. But again, we see it as an opportunity to engage the host country as well. They are, many places, they are working on just building the basic infrastructure for their own grid, or they're working on putting their own efficiencies in. And in places like Europe, they're miles ahead on doing efficiency gains in their own market that we can then take advantage of. So we look at it as an opportunity to learn what's going on over there, and many times our facility managers and our management officers will come back to us saying, there's a great thing going on here, why can't we do this? One instance in particular, right now, Landon is mandatory. There's a mandatory installation for smart meters. And so the question became, well, do we need to do smart meters in buildings where it's already mandatory in country? How can we take advantage of this? And so we're working actually with the utility company to see if we can't just have them share over all that information so we don't have to build out that infrastructure. So we're trying to take advantage of whatever situation's on the ground, try to engage the host country and engage the private sector, but of course be able to share the American story and bring our solutions over. So it's an amalgamation of all.
Interesting. So let me make a flip over to Kathleen again. And I want to talk about something that is dear to me. I teach a class called Survey of Finance and Engineering Economy, where we actually talk about the time value of money. $1 today is not the same a year from now. That's talking about the real worth of the dollar and the actual value of the dollar. So when you look at some of these opportunities vis-a-vis the targets that have been set in this executive order, how do you see the cost implication, especially for agencies that are trying to move the needle further? And I'm asking this question because already we said we've made all these gains over the past 40 years. Making the first step at times is easy, but then when you get to the point where you're saturated in your improvement, making that next step, in economics we call it the marginal cost. At the margin of high levels of improvement in performance, how do you see the cost being an impediment to what agencies are looking, especially given that dwindling budgetary situations is the new normal, especially since 2008? How do you see that playing out?
It's, again, a great question to ask and to respond to. And I have a couple responses. One, people talk about energy efficiency. They talk about the low-hanging fruit because it is just cost-effective. It does pay back. And then certainly there's the concept of the low-hanging fruit that continually regrows on the tree, right, in the pace with innovation. So, we make progress. We also see, and the things that we're talking about, even with the opportunities with the data and what you can do with the real-time metering. I mean, we've got new opportunities before us all the time, from how we can manage the data we can use, the technologies that are coming into these buildings. So I think that's quite exciting. We also had the great opportunity to support the White House in the development of its goals for greenhouse gases and continuing energy efficiency improvements in buildings. And certainly we can see that the 2.5% goal for building improvements annually through 2025 is something that is cost effective and achievable from the standpoint of the agencies. And I think it's estimated to really save on energy costs something on the order of $18 billion over this period of time. So those are sort of our estimates. The final thing I'll say on this topic, and again, something that I think is really going to be fascinating in terms of what we can try to make happen here, is drawing on some of the lessons learned from the GSA effort around the deep retrofits. It was true that in the past, performance contracting was delivering whole building savings or project savings, I don't know, sort of in the 20-ish% range. And what GSA's deep retrofit pilot demonstrated was things more in the 40% range across a fuller set of buildings. Clearly the Virgin Islands was quite an accomplishment, but across a broader range of projects. So that's bringing in the new technologies, it's doing it in an integrated way. It's leveraging third-party financing, to your point about the scarce dollars with the federal agencies. So again, I see, as we say, there can be challenges to the challenges, but I think we've got the tools to bring together and really make a success of this.
So Jeff, from the private sector, given that for most of this energy efficiency improvements we look at, the upfront capital costs sometimes can be barriers to embracing them. And knowing fully well that the private sector is out there to make money, how do you reconcile that with, the savings that she just mentioned, $18 billion, right? How do you reconcile the objective of Schneider Electric, for instance, who wants to make money, against the objective of the government, who wants to save it?
Very thin margins. That's the answer. And it truly is. I mean, recognize these contracts are long-term contracts, 10, 15, sometimes 20 years. So it is in the government's best interest to make sure that you choose your partner wisely and that they are an ongoing, economically viable entity. So you don't want to partner with an entity that is losing money. That being said, the less margins we put on project, the more work we can get done for the government, the more energy efficiency initiatives and more energy conservation measures we can implement. So it's a collaborative exercise. The current state is full transparency, that we just do open book work. We show the government subcontractor costs. We show them the margins that are required by shareholders, and then it's a collaborative effort.
So I see here a great opportunity for the State Department, especially for what I'll call outreach efforts. So it's one thing to bring in 22 experts in energy efficiency from across the world to the US. I think it's also another thing to actually export some of this homegrown improvements. Now, coming from a developing world myself, and given some of the issues of development that we see out there, how do you see the State Department not only taking care of facilities that belong to the State Department abroad, how do you see them actually exporting some of this knowledge that we're generating back at home?
Well, and I think I forgot to mention, when we build our embassies, or we build our major facilities overseas, we build them to LEED standards or LEED Silver. In many places where we've actually done these constructions, they are the first LEED building in that country. So it becomes a model and a story, again, of U.S. technologies and commitment towards sustainability in our buildings. We obviously interact with the host country on the technologies that we're using at the embassies. We share that story with them openly for the most part. We're working to try to bring, like say, smart meters or even the financing tools, ESPCs, to be able to explain how did we put this project into place here with our limited budget. Could you do something like that in your own country? So that becomes part of that conversation speech that our energy envoy and our climate envoy have with their counterparts in other countries and developing countries as well, and their program offices to try to use what we're doing as really model examples. And you know, we're launching an Ecos Capitals Forum where we bring the foreign diplomatic community together in various capitals to share best practices on how we're trying to obviously reduce our own footprint in those communities, because we don't want to be in a country which is struggling to try to generate energy for its people and then be the largest energy consumer on their map, the country map. So we're trying to very much share different technologies and advancements that we're doing. The U.S. government has lots of different programs to share and DOE actually is leading the way on that, for technology and then for financing those technologies. And so that, again, that's part of that conversation. So when they look at what we have, they ask, well, how do you do it? And then we bring in a lot of our experts to share that capacity.
Thank you very much. Well, ladies and gentlemen, let's give it up to this panelists we have here. Thank you very much. Thank you.